Welcome back, YouTube. Today we're going to work on the interior of the pop-up, and also we're going to get the lift system installed. In my last video, I installed all of the wiring for the exterior light. These wires are in the walls and they have to be in place before you can put the interior panels on. The interior panels are nothing more than rectangles made out of 1/8 inch paneling. And so you measure the space, you cut it with a circular saw, and then you staple it in place. One thing you need to be aware of is that you need to go ahead and measure and get all of the paneling that you can get for this trailer in one load, because your seller will come up with a different shade of paneling the next time around that you go, or the wood grain won't be the same. So if you want your paneling to look the same, you need to get it all in one lot. If you've been following along in this pop-up rebuild, you know the only thing I have to go by is my old pictures and my measurements of the pop-up before I tore it apart. Even with all of that, there were some parts of this trailer that were rotted and non-existent to be able to measure. So what all this is leading up to is I went to install the panel on the front of the trailer, and there were no lips on either side for me to staple the paneling to. And so I had to go ahead and fabricate and install some lips on each side for something for the panel to hold on to. And installing the lips wasn't difficult. It was just a couple of pieces of 1x2, and I screwed and glued them in place. After they were in place, then I was able to staple the front panel on and finish the interior paneling. Now comes the fun part of installing the lift system. In this view here, I'm circling, and I want you to see that I am marking on the floor where all the pockets are for the lift system. I also marked where all the studs were in the wall so that I would be able to hit them later on when I need them. You have to cut out a window for each lift system at each corner of the pop-up. To cut the paneling, I just used a razor knife and made several passes, and the knife cut the paneling fairly easily. This window will allow the bottom part of the lift system to slide up into the window and be able to be screwed to the floor. Also had to use a 2-inch hole saw to cut the hole for the crank mechanism. Now I installed the crank mechanism on the passenger side front of the trailer. All of the lift system is covered by cabinets and paneling in the end. None of the lift system will be visible. After the bottom part of that lift was screwed in place, it was time to put the crank mechanism in place for good. For this crank, there are 4 holes that have to be drilled in the floor. The location of 3 of the holes can be easily marked with a Sharpie. However, the hole in the corner can't be reached by a Sharpie. So I used a little bit of spray can black to spritz over the hole, and it would leave a black mark where I needed to drill the hole. Getting that bolt to go in that hole way back in that corner is very difficult. And I was able to use a magnet to line the bolt up and then push it down with my fingertips. It became obvious to me that Jayco installed this lift system on the deck of this trailer before they installed the walls. On each one of the curved bottom parts of the lift, there was a white strip of nylon there for a rub strip, so that the springs would not rub metal to metal. Each rub strip had to be stapled in place on the deck of the trailer. Then the spring could be inserted into the curve and it would slide up inside of the wall. You have to route all 4 cables, and the cables all look the same. So I would use some masking tape to put on a particular cable if I wanted to trace one cable and make sure these cables were not crossing each other and getting tangled up with each other. Here you can see the lifting springs sticking up about 2 inches from each wall. This is the adjustment for the height of the lifting springs. Each cable is attached to this plate, and you can use 7/16 wrenches to adjust these eye bolts in or out. I initially installed this long spring guide about 4 inches too far away from the curved part that it needed to be. This resulted in the lift spring not being able to lift up as high as the other ones. So I had a choice of either adjusting the length of the cable, which required cutting the cable and re-splicing it, or I could unbolt and move this spring support and be able to put it in the right location. I'll have to fill up the holes that are left over with caulk. These holes will be covered up again by paneling anyway. Your aim is to put these lift supports in the correct location so that all of the 4 lifting springs are at the same height all the time. The bolts that hold all these lifting pieces to the deck are 1/4 inch 20 bolts, about 1.5 inches long. Now I had cycled all of the lifts up, and I wanted to turn the crank and lower them all down and make sure they were all lowering at the same rate. Since I didn't have any weight on the lift, I had to go and pull the springs down by hand to keep the tension on the cables. When I installed those cables, I wanted to make sure that the cables were not tangling up or crossing at any point on the lift cycle. And I was able to return all the spring lift points back down to about 2 inches above the walls again. Now we're ready to put the rest of the lifting points on and to start rebuilding the top of the trailer. We're also at a point to where we can install the 30 amp shore power service to the trailer as well. I hope you learned something by watching this. I've got lots more to come.